first
I'll
thing
do it.
comes up. All right.
Hey, good morning and welcome to Hometown Heroes. This is Tuesday. I don't know if you can hear the sound of freedom, but I've got an airplane from NASJRB going over. Mary, our co-host, is not with us today. She had a babysitting job with one of her grandchildren, so we'll miss you, Mary, but hope you're watching today. We've got Kelly Crager from the university, or from Texas Tech University. He's the head of the, guns up. He's the head of the oral history section for the Vietnam Center at Texas Tech. And I met Kelly, Dr. Crager. I met him several months ago at Lockheed Martin. We were both there for a veterans deal that they were having, a veterans event, and we started talking, and I was intrigued by your work, Kelly. So welcome to Hometown Heroes.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you and Mary asking me to do this for y'all today.
And just tell us a little bit about you. Where did you grow up?
Sure. I grew up in a little town in southeastern Kansas, a little Irish-German farming ranching town. Got away from there, went to school, went to work in a hot dog and bologna factory eventually in Garland, Texas. And if that will send you back to school, nothing will.
Is that where the meat byproducts are? Because that's one of the ingredients, I think, of some of that.
That's where we made the good stuff, Ranger dogs and all of that. So after a few years of that, college started sounding an awful lot better. And I eventually pursued a doctorate that I received from the University of North Texas in 2005, military history, my specialty. I taught at Texas A&M as a visiting professor for a few years, teaching military history and U.S. foreign relations and a number of other things.
My goodness.
In Lubbock at Texas Tech since 2008. They wanted someone with a military history background and oral history background. Did a lot of work with World War II veterans for my doctoral dissertation and other research.
And tell us just a little bit about your doctoral dissertation, because that really intrigued me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Most people are probably familiar with the bridge on the River Kwai, of course, from the from the famous movie and the book. So most who worked on that were, of course, Asian laborers. Then there were British and Australians and Dutch POWs who worked on it. But there were also over 500 Texan POWs who worked on the railway between Burma and Thailand as slave laborers through the war years. There were some Americans from North and West Texas who were captured in Java, the defense of Java, part of the 36th Division. There were an artillery battalion that was kind of siphoned off. They were captured by the Japanese in early March of 1942 and were forced to labor, part of them, the most of them were forced to labor on the Death Railway, as it became known. And the only information we had on these POWs and their experiences, because the Japanese forbade keeping records, were oral history interviews that a professor at the University of North Texas conducted with these guys, 20, 30, 40 years after their experiences. So UNT has a very large collection of these things, around 130, 140 of these interviews. So my doctoral dissertation looked at all of these interviews and combined all of these stories to, one, describe the experience, because it obviously is a unique experience, and the Texan experience was different from the Australian experience and the Dutch experience in a number of different ways. And the second part of this was to determine how they survived, and survived in such high numbers. I mean, the Texans survived in far higher numbers than a lot of the Australians and the British and the Dutch, and certainly the Asian laborers. So it was a really good project for me as a doctoral dissertation. Texas A&M published it as a full monograph in 2008. It's been a really good project for me, and perhaps one of these days we'll revisit this, talking about the 36th Texas Division and the Lost Battalion sometime in the future here.
I certainly hope so, because my mother was born in Cisco, just north of Brownwood, and whenever the war was going, the convoys would come through Cisco right by our house on, it's Conrad Hilton now, but it used to be Avenue D. But the troops would come by, and the kids would throw candy up to the troops, and the troops would throw their addresses and stuff out to the people. So, and then I know that some of our family knew people that were in the Lost Battalion, so that really intrigued me. But let's just visit about your work and the work that Texas Tech is doing now with the Vietnam Center.
Sure. Glad to talk about that. The Texas Tech has the Vietnam Center and Sam Johnson Vietnam Archive. It is the world's largest center for the study of the Vietnam War. Second only to, I should say, the amount of information that we have is second only to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. We were founded by Vietnam veterans in the late 1980s. Our founding director was a gentleman named Jim Reckner. Jim was a two-tour Navy veteran of the Vietnam War. He was an advisor to the Vietnamese Brown Water Navy down in the Delta.
Okay.
And once his naval career was over after the war, he got his Ph.D. in U.S. history. He was a Teddy Roosevelt Great White Fleet historian, Navy guy. And he came to Texas Tech to teach. One of the things that Jim always did before he would teach a class, first day, is hand out a sheet of 10 questions about just general information about U.S. history, kind of a quiz. How much do you know about this coming into this class? And in 1988, he handed out the questionnaire, and there was the final question, number 10, was, what American general is most closely associated with the war in Vietnam? Now, this is 1988, of course. And he said, out of 100 students, one got it right.
Was it Westmoreland?
It was, General William Westmoreland, of course.
Okay. I got it right.
You got it right. You had.
Of course, I was a child and a teenager during that time. Well, let me just interrupt you for a second. Whenever we need to change slides, just tell me.
Okay, sure. Absolutely will. And Jim, being a veteran, being a Vietnam veteran, and being a historian, was nonplussed by this. And he got with his other Vietnam veterans out in Lubbock. He's from Pennsylvania. But his other Vietnam veteran friends out in Lubbock and said, what do you have that represents your time in Vietnam? I mean, this is 1988. This is 20 years after the Tet Offensive. You know, the war ended in 75, and 13 years later, American college students have very little understanding of the war. So he said, what do you have? Do you have any photographs? Do you have combat boots or letters home? Anything that I can put in a box and teach a class on the Vietnam War so these students, the war's not forgotten. So the very first donation to our archive was a box of letters home that from Slayton, Texas, that a mother had kept. Her son sent her letters from his time. He's a corpsman, Navy corpsman with the Marines up in I Corps. And she'd kept every letter that he'd sent home. And that was the first collection of anything donated to our archive. That was back in 88 and 89. And it really is symbolic of the work that we do. Now, we have, and we'll go into this later, all kinds of government records and military records dating all the way back, just a huge amount of information. But these letters home really are symbolic of the way we approach our work there. It's about, history is human experience through time, right? And these letters represent one human being's experience through his time in the Vietnam War. Most of the collections that come to us come from individuals, come from individual veterans, come from family members or friends of veterans. And I think that what we offer is a much more personal look at the war in addition to the more official records and documents that we have here. Go to the next slide, if you would, Rick, please. And I think this is a pretty telling slide. See, like I mentioned, Jim was from Pennsylvania, and he told me one time that he went to the Gettysburg Memorial there in Pennsylvania, and there was a wall of names of Pennsylvanians who died in the battle. I've never been there, but that's the way that he explained it to me. And he said it was moving to me, and I understand the historical importance of it, and I've been in war, and I know what this means. But he said not one name on that wall had any resonance with me. None of the names meant anything. And he said, what about the wall in Vietnam? Or the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C. He says, all of those names, 58,000 plus names on that wall, in 150 years from now, those names are going to have no resonance for the people who come by to look at them. So what can we do to make sure that the memory of these people is not forgotten? It's not another memorial, it's not necessarily another museum, but it's archives, it's information. We need to gather as much information about the war as we can and let people use it as for scholars, for students, historians, veterans, family members, really family members especially, to kind of come to their own conclusions to what the war means. So with that in mind, he started this archive literally out of his briefcase. He was putting the archive around his briefcase for a while. And Jim's one of these guys that if someone doesn't tell you no, he assumes that means yes. Uh, so he continued to build this collection of information about the war, and Texas Tech let him do it. And we've become today, like I say, the world's largest center for the study of the Vietnam War. We have over 30 million pages of documents. We have hundreds of thousands of photographs and slides and audio recordings. If you want to listen to Adrian Cronauer or Pat Sajak with the Armed Forces Radio Vietnam radio broadcast, we've got those that are available in streaming as well. We have, we've got weapons, we've got sea rations on our shelves that still occasionally explode from time to time. We've got 5 helicopters in our collection, and of course the Oral History Project, which is what I do. We've got around 1,600 interviews in our collection with people, and it expands it's the expanse of the Vietnam War in a number of different ways. And I'll talk about that later. But this quote here, I think, from Jim really sums it up. Monuments are important for those who served and sacrificed, but it is the archives that will provide meaningful answers today and for future generations. And that really was kind of our guiding principle since 1989 when the archive began.
My
Next slide,
goodness.
please. Here are some of the folks who were involved in our work. Of course, Elmo Zumwalt there is the top photo. Jim was a Navy guy, and he approached Admiral Zumwalt, who of course was CNO during the Vietnam War, and approached Zumwalt, and Zumwalt said, "Hey, this is a great idea, Reckner. I'll be glad to lend you my name and help you out as much as I can here in Washington, D.C., but I'm never moving to Lubbock, Texas." Well, shortly before Admiral Zumwalt passed away, he was living 6 months out of the year in Lubbock to try to get this thing up and running. So he really fell in love with our project and was very, very important to us in the work that we were doing. And a number of others as well. Westmoreland, before he passed away, was a supporter of our work. And you can see some of the local guys, Jim Reckner, Phil Price, John Bessler, a number of local folks who were Vietnam veterans involved as well. And we are now a unit of in the College of Arts and Sciences. Institute for Peace and Conflict is our guiding organization as we work our way through. Let's see, next slide, if you would, please, Rick. And you can see here our mission is to collect, preserve, and provide access to the history of the Vietnam War and to support and encourage research and education regarding all aspects of the Vietnam War experience. So it's not just that we've got this, we're collecting this stuff, actively collecting this stuff. What we do not want to see as an archivist and as a historian and as the son of a World War II veteran, it just makes me sick to think that when Vietnam veteran generation is gone, that their stuff, the tangible evidence of their existence in Vietnam for that 1 year for most folks, for it to wind up in a landfill just makes me sick. You know, that footlocker that you have in the attic or in the basement, or those letters or those photographs or whatever it might be, if it's related to your Vietnam experience and it's unique, we want to have it. So we are actively collecting these things from children of veterans, grandchildren of veterans, from veterans themselves. Don't let this stuff disappear. Don't let the tangible evidence of your experiences in Vietnam disappear. Give it to us. We will collect it. We will preserve it. We have a state-of-the-art archive out there in Lubbock on the campus of Texas Tech University. We're in the process of raising funds for a new one. We need a larger building because we are bursting at the seams out there. You know, all the light filter, HEPA filter, all those sort of things that we have, preserving it and providing access, which we do as a brick and mortar archive. People are always welcome to come and research in our reading room, but also online. I'll talk about that in a little while as well. I think you might have a question for me, Rick.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times the family doesn't want things because maybe the veteran never talked about the war, or maybe he had bad experiences and said, you know, I don't want to have anything to do with that stuff, but he kept it. But it's not important to them. But it's important to preserving the history of Vietnam and the veterans, and particularly each individual veteran with their contributions.
Absolutely. You could not have said that any better. You know, and I run into this quite a bit. Nobody wants this stuff. My kids don't want this stuff. And I say, wait until 10 or 15 years after you're gone, and what your kids are going to want will change. I wish to hell I'd listened to mom or dad when they're telling stories, or I wish I'd asked them about these experiences, or I wish I'd kept their stuff. Now it's gone, and it's permanently gone. We're not getting that stuff back. So I would encourage family members to get involved in this as well, because it is their history, you know. And the things that we're collecting and preserving and making available will be around for as long as there's a Texas Tech University in digital technology and a brick and mortar archive. So your family's history will always be there. Think about how cool it would be to have, the letters from your great, great, great whatever from the Civil War, or an oral history with them in their own words. To be able to push a button and to have access to this stuff, to me, is absolutely magical. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person who feels that way. So getting these items, um, getting them collected, preserving them, and again making them available is just huge for what we're doing.
And
But
the letters are so important.
oh my,
Just to kind of get a glimpse, because my father was a Marine in the South Pacific, and he wrote letters to his mom and dad. His name was Raymond, and that's what they called him. And in one of the first letters, he said, whenever I'm going to change to go to another island, I'm going to sign the letters Ray. Otherwise, it's just Raymond. And so I can read through the letters and I can see when he's changed, because he'd sign it Ray. But
isn't that interesting? That's really cool.
because, they used to censor all the letters coming back. So
Well, shoot me that next slide, if you would, please, Rick. Some of the things that we are involved in here. Uh, the Vietnam Center is part of who we are, but it guides and directs and funds the work that we do in the archive. So it's the same organization, but two separate functions here. Obviously, you see support and guide and fund the Sam Johnson Vietnam Archive. We were recently named for Congressman Sam Johnson. I don't know how many folks know who Sam Johnson was, but he was a U.S. Air Force pilot. He was captured early on in the war, shot down and captured, and spent the rest of the war as a POW in Hanoi and other environments around Hanoi. He came back and was, of course, a congressman, U.S. congressman from Plano district. And he was instrumental in helping us do what we did. He and Jim Reckner were very good friends. And Congressman Johnson was able to make sure that we got some federal funding for the virtual Vietnam archive, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Congressman Johnson was, we couldn't have done what we did without his support in Washington, D.C. So in his honor, of course, we have renamed the archive for him. Our archive manuscript collections, again, we can talk about that in more detail if you'd like. Our archive library, we have around 15,000 separate titles in our library. The virtual Vietnam archive, again, we'll get into that, but that's our digital portal to all things that we have that are digitized and available online. Oral History Project, which I could talk about all day, but we'll spare you the worst of that. Research and reference services, we've got a full-time reference archivist whose job is only to answer the phone and emails to explain how to get access to and find things within our archive. And if by chance we don't have it, she can help you find it somewhere else, point you in the right direction.
in
She
the
knows where all
oral
the bodies are buried.
in the Oral History Project, so you do an audio tape or a videotape?
Well, and we'll get into this a little bit more
Okay.
in a little bit, but I can do a number of different things. Typically, we do these interviews over the phone. It's a technology that everyone has access to. It's a technology that everyone understands. I'm not the most technologically savvy guy, so it works out well for me. But it also allows us to do more than one interview in a day for zero cost, essentially. I don't have to fly from California to Florida to Oregon to North Dakota to do these interviews. I can call a veteran, largely veterans, in the morning and have an interview session with them, and then prepare for the next interview and have an interview session with someone else later in the evening or the afternoon. So it just makes it so much more accessible with the interviews that we do here on, of course, limited budgets. So we also do them in person. I live here in Granbury, which is not technically part of the DFW Metroplex. People in Granbury like to point that out. But since I'm in the area, I've relocated. Since I'm in the area, I can do them in person as well. And also available for to talks to different veterans groups or civic organizations. Always happy to do that. Would encourage anyone who's interested in finding out more about this. Let me know. I have a good, healthy pickup truck, and I'll travel all over to talk about the work that we're doing here. We think it's that important, and a variety of different special projects. Okay, next slide, please. Our archival holdings, over 3,000 discrete collections, individual collections. And you can see the laundry list of things that we have here. This is not the entirety of it all, but letters, journals, photographs, slides, military documents, posters and maps, audio recordings. We average about a one material donation a day. Some days it may be 20 in one day, and some days it may be zero, kind of depending on how it falls. And a collection is as little as one photograph or one letter, or as large as if we have a 45-foot van trailer full of Agent Orange documents that were donated to us a number of years ago, and we have gotten a federal grant, a National Endowment for the Humanities grant, to process and hopefully digitize that and make it available on our website. So anything that you have is not too small for us, I'll promise you. And if it's too big for us, I haven't seen it yet. So all those folks who have these things and wonder what they're going to do with them, give me a shout, and we can make sure that your legacy is preserved. Again, in book catalogs in our library. Next slide, if you would, please, Rick. The different people who donate to us, that's a picture of Jenny Young, who was, of course, a donut dolly, which many Vietnam veterans will remember pretty fondly, and the work that they did there during the war. Military veterans of all ranks and branches, and I mean all ranks and branches. You know, I've interviewed everybody from the Air Force Chief of Staff to Commandant of the Marine Corps to swap jockey first class Smith, you know, and everybody in between. Everybody has a story to tell. The Vietnam War is this gigantic mosaic, and we can't begin to understand what it was until we start putting these pieces in. And every story, every letter, every photograph is a part of that story that helps to explain what the Vietnam War was. We are the official repository for any number of veterans organizations, Vietnam veterans organizations, NGOs, government officials, and diplomats, Vietnam War scholars, Vietnamese Americans. We've got a huge collection of information regarding Vietnamese Americans, especially in the aftermath of the fall of Saigon, documenting their history coming to the United States through the United Nations orderly departure program. I can talk more about that, but it's kind of the Ellis Island papers of the Vietnamese diaspora following 1975, tracking the lives of these folks as they came to the United States and everything that entailed. Huge collection of that, really, really important stuff. Anti-war protesters. Some folks are still a little upset with the anti-war groups from the Vietnam War, which I can certainly understand, but they're also part of the story. You know, and it's a really important aspect of the work that we do. We are an apolitical organization. Yes, we all have our thoughts and our prejudices on the war and different aspects of the war, but it doesn't influence the work that we're doing. The Vietnam War protests were part of the era. We want their stuff too. You know, we want their interviews as well. You know, we're not promoting one side of the war versus another side of the war. We want it all to collect it, make it available so other people can make up their own minds. It's for future generations to determine that, not us. Contemporary scholars and researchers. Goodness, I don't know how many folks we've had who write books and articles and has devoted their life to studying the Vietnam War. But when they have this particular project finished up, they finish this book project, whatever it might be, they say, I don't want this stuff around here in my office anymore. They send it out to us. We catalog it, preserve it, make it available. So if anyone else wants to question their work, they can come look at the exact sources that they used in writing that book or article or presentation, and are certainly welcome to do so. This is wide open, the work that we're doing out here. Collections from all participant countries, U.S., Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Australia, Korea, you name it. Next slide, if you would, please. There's a picture of our library upstairs, over 15,000 volumes of the Vietnam War, Vietnamese culture, Southeast Asia, a huge collection of periodicals from the time. Next slide, if you would, please, Rick. Now, this is a really cool project here, the Virtual Vietnam Archive, the VVA. Lubbock is a great place. I raised my kids out there. We hated to move. I still go back about once a month. Love it out there. But anyone who's been to Lubbock can attest, it's a long way from anywhere. When you're out there, you're out there. And you don't just get there by accident. You have to want to go there. So in spite of all the great work that Jim had been doing for so many years, and others as well, we understand that there are limitations. Getting to Lubbock for research can be a difficult thing. And it was also the 21st century, right? So a way to make this more accessible to people. It's one thing to have a brick and mortar archive where all this cool stuff is, but if no one can access it, then what good is it? You know, and what use is it? So Jim and some other of the folks in the archive determined to use digital technology. And we were actually on the forefront of digital archival technology. There were so many people back in the day who were laughing at you. No, this is a flash in the pan. This digital archive stuff is never going to work. How are you going to make this happen? They're laughing us, out of business. And Jim had proven that it can work with the right people and the right vision. So what we did was create the Virtual Vietnam Archive. It says there in 2001. Um, and the mission here is to collect, preserve, and then digitize the entirety of our non-copyrighted holdings and put it on our website so the world has free and open access to it. So we have staff of students and archivists who come in, digitize this stuff, describe it, make sure that it can be found and then placed on our website. So everything that we have in our archive that it is legal to copy or is not copyrighted and is legal to place online will be placed online. We've got over 10 million pages of documents online right now and more coming on every day. So this stuff is freely available to anyone who wants to access it. You could be on a beach with your cell phone, and if you have internet access, you can access these holdings in the archive. And again, it's the entirety of the archive that is available at your fingertips. There's no membership, there's no login. It costs absolutely nothing. It has been nothing but a huge boon to the study of the Vietnam War, having this stuff so available. Scholars don't have to travel to Lubbock to find what they're looking for. They can do it on their laptops at home. Same thing for students or anyone else who's interested. Families, other veterans. I've been here for over just about 16 years. I go on the website from time to time and still just get lost in the pictures, just kind of surfing our search page. We have a pretty powerful search page to help you find the things that you're looking for. So the Virtual Vietnam Archive was just a huge boon to the study of the Vietnam War and to show that digital archival technology works, and people have been jumping aboard ever since. But you can see some of the more technical things here. I don't know what most of them mean because I'm a dumb historian, not a digital archivist. But you can see PDF format, searchable through our website. And again, we have a reference archivist who's available, 40 hours a week to aid in any sort of questions you might have looking for what you're looking for. But yeah, it's just been it's been huge, absolutely huge. The next slide, if you would, please. Here's some numbers. These are old numbers. I need to update this PowerPoint, but we have over 10 million pages now that are available, and you can see the individual records, the documents. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, the kinds of things that we have up and online. And come back tomorrow, those numbers will be up, and the next day they'll be up higher than that. So it's a constant process of placing these things online. So if you don't find what you're looking for today, come back in a week, maybe it's there. But again, oral history interviews, electronic media, finding aids, museum objects. You see a picture of George in our Air America uniform. We've been working with Air America for any number of years. A great organization. We're always glad to work with them through their collections and oral history interviews and things.
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Our podcast, we put them on YouTube, and we do have a lot of Vietnam veterans on our podcast. Is that something that we could send to the archives?
The podcast?
Yeah.
Themselves? That's a great question. And my answer as an academic is maybe. I'd have to talk to the director of our archive to see if that would be possible. Get with me after the podcast, Rick, and we'll talk about that.
Very good.
Next slide, please. Okay, some of our usage, and again, these numbers are old here from 2018. Almost 4 million in just 2018 alone. Cumulative total obviously is far higher than that. The different searches conducted, items downloaded. These are numbers that we can track. We can't track who is searching for them. We can't track exactly what they're looking at, but we do know the numbers that are being used.
That's a lot of numbers. And it's probably doubled since then, or if not tripled.
Could very well have been. And you see pictures here, members of the POW, MIA, it's got a different name now, Accounting Command. They've been using our stuff for years and years. Whether it's our online stuff every couple of years, they send a few researchers to see what hasn't been digitized yet, to see if there may be something to help find our missing servicemen from the war. And I believe it's over 50 actionable items that they found in the last 15 years or so to help them find American missing in action. Just using our stuff alone has helped them triangulate these positions and return remains of the missing. Pretty impressive and really rewarding stuff. Next slide, please. Oral History Project. I told you we'd get here eventually. It says over 2,600 participants. Those are people who have applied to be interviewed, and as well as those who have applied from all 50 states, foreign countries. Again, these numbers are old. I personally have done, 500 or 600 interviews. All of our interviews are recorded digitally and placed on our website. So any interview that you want to listen to, you can go and find and listen to in its entirety. We don't we don't edit our interviews for any purpose, whether it's to make someone look good or to look bad. It's all on there. So anything that you say on the recording is going to be represented in the audio file that's going to be available online, and that includes myself. So when I make a mistake in an interview, that's out there too. Happens
And
probably more often than I want it to, but not too bad.
I think that you told me whenever we talked a few months ago that you just put the information out there so people can make their own judgments and their own decisions about the war.
Absolutely. Yeah, again, we're not in business to tell anyone how to think or how to believe. There's enough of that going on. We're just gathering the information so that you can do your own work and come to your own conclusions. And to me, that's what scholarship is, and that's the only honest scholarship that there is. And again, these oral history interviews are a big part of that. You can look at all the military records. You can go to unit records. You can go to the combat chronology. All of the things are the government records. But again, history is individual experience through time. And if you want to know what it was like to be in a firefight, you can read the after action reports, and you can also listen to the oral history interviews with a veteran who is talking about this in his own words. It's incredibly powerful for researchers, for scholars, but also for families. And I've had this happen on more than one occasion, being contacted by people whose husband or whose father, whose grandfather never talked about their experiences in the war, but who we interviewed in these things, and they'd never had access to that before. And when they discover that, it is kind of life-changing for them. All of our interviews, well, most of our interviews are conducted over the telephone, like I mentioned earlier, although we can do them in person, and I'm slowly embracing Zoom or Skype. We'll see how that goes. But we do full life interviews. We start with when and where you're born. We want to know who you were before you got to Vietnam. We talk about your family history, going to school, your pastimes as a kid, before we even get close to your time in Vietnam. We get you in the military. We talk about your different levels of training and weapons training, or whatever the training might be, language, whatever, before we get you to Vietnam. And then we spend, of course, the bulk of each of the interviews on your Vietnam experiences, and not just combat things like that, although that is a big part of it, of course, for those who were combat veterans, but a lot of people weren't combat veterans as well. We talk about daily life. We talk about sea rations, and that's always a good conversation. The music that you remember, the people that you served with, your R&R, what you do in your downtime, in addition to humping the bush or flying an F-4 or whatever it might be. These interviews run the gamut. We want everybody's story in as much detail as we can get them, because these are the only interviews you're going to get with us, and we want it to be as full and as thorough as we can get it. We bring you back home from the war, talk about life, family, careers after the war, and sum up with just some general questions about the war and your thoughts on it and its influences on you. About 97% of our interviews are with American veterans of the Vietnam War. And again, this is all branches of the service, all MOSs, time and dates and country, whatever. We want everybody's story. If you're a cook, we want your story. If you're an Audie Murphy type, we want your story, and everybody in between. But we also interview wives, widows, children of veterans, because that's part of the Vietnam War story. Like I mentioned before, we interview war protesters who are interested in being interviewed for the project. We've interviewed politicians and diplomats. But the reality is, and you and I talked about this before we started, Rick, the window right now is open, but that window is closing. The Vietnam generation is passing far too quickly. And if we don't do something to collect these items, yes, the photographs, these things, but those things are likely going to outlive the individual veteran. But when you're gone, your story is gone, unless someone makes the effort to listen to the story, to record it, and to put it in a usable format so your great-great-great-grandkids can push a button and listen to you in your own words, tell not just your Vietnam story, but your life story. I mean, I used to think as a historian that the work we were doing is so important for scholars, and it is. As I've done this year after year, I'm become convinced how much more important it is for family members to have access to this stuff. So please, anyone who's listening and interested, if you would like to be interviewed, give me a shout. We'll have all the contact information, of course. Or if you know a Vietnam veteran whose story needs to be told, may be interested, point them towards us. Let's get these things while we can, because we're not always going to be able to get them.
Yeah, because I looked at some numbers before the show, and about 2.7 million Americans served on the ground in Vietnam is what I saw, and there's about 850,000 still alive. So we've lost over half of them already. And, you know, in another 10 years, there'll be a lot fewer. So this is a critical time in our history for those Vietnam veterans out there, you know, get your story told. And for their families, encourage your Vietnam veteran father or husband or uncle or whoever, get his story told or her story told, because there's some Vietnam veterans that are women. So
absolutely, the nurses and certainly the donut dollies, always a great group to speak with. I love the donut dollies. But whatever your Vietnam experiences were, we want them. Again, we were all born with an expiration date, and when that date hits, whenever that is, our stories are gone.
That's true.
So let's do something to make sure that your story is told and will be around forever. And if it's not with us, at least with somebody.
And we've got one good friend that comes to roll call almost every month, and her name's B.J. Pryor. She was a flight attendant, or back then a stewardess, and made all these trips over to Vietnam, taking troops and bringing them back for several years. And she's compiled a book. She goes around to a lot of the Vietnam veteran organizations and speaks about her experiences, because, you know, she saw the guys going over there, you know, whole and everything, and then coming back, you know, with injuries. And a lot of times the injuries that we see now are inside and not outside, with all the post-traumatic stress and things. So a lot of interesting people out there other than veterans that have Vietnam stories too. So
great point, and absolutely that's the case. You know, these we typically think these kinds of things, well, we only want veterans, we only want combat veterans, and man, that's just not the case. We want that too. We want everybody. So like you said, put a call out for anyone who may be interested. We're here, and we're going to be here, so get in contact with us. This is what we do. All right, next slide, please. Okay, other projects, online subject guides. Like I mentioned before, we have an awful lot of information on Agent Orange, Dow Chemical, and a number of other organizations that were being, of course, went through the lawsuits in the 1980s, I think 1990s even. Gathered all of the materials they're going to use for their defense, you know, in these lawsuits. And it was donated to, I believe it was a place in New Jersey. They couldn't house it, couldn't care for it, so they asked us if we wanted it. And that's where we got that 45-foot van trailer full of boxes.
My goodness.
It's an enormous amount of information on the history of the lawsuit and the information of Dow Chemical and others involved in processing of Agent Orange and the dioxin and these kinds of things. It's going to revolutionize what we know about Vietnam as it regards Agent Orange. It's going to be great once we get it up and online. Riverine warfare. I mean, you know, after Vietnam, of course, we were never going to be involved in military conflict where water was going to be an issue, especially brown water was going to be an issue, right? Then we find ourselves in the Middle East and in Iraq, and turns out there are a couple important rivers there. You may have heard of the Tigris and Euphrates, and the Navy had essentially forgotten riverine warfare. So they had to come to us and look at what we had on the history of riverine warfare in Vietnam to relearn some of these lessons, you know, to refresh their corporate memory and understanding of it.
And they also,
yes, please.
On the Brown Water Navy, they also had to go back and get some of the veterans from Vietnam to come and kind of give them some advice. I've got a good friend, Rex King, that was called up to give them some advice on how to do this.
Mm-hmm. I interviewed Rex.
Did you really?
Ago.
Okay.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Met him through roll call, in fact. What a character. What a guy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to describe me as a character. So.
Some of our online exhibits, Black History Month, Women's History Month, the Vietnamese American history. Again, this is not just the Vietnam War, and let's also not forget that this was a war in Vietnam involving Vietnamese. We oftentimes forget that in the United States. We have an enormous amount of information on the history of the Vietnamese and Vietnamese Americans and their roles in the war. The guest lecture series, we've had Adrian Cronauer. We mentioned him. Of course, everybody remembers him from Good Morning Vietnam, the DJ. We had Kim Phuc, the girl in the photo. Of course, the young girl who was naked being burned by napalm with an Arvin air attack. She was burned there. Dick Rutan, Rocky Blyer was just a real treat when we brought Rocky Blyer to campus. Very gregarious guy. Let everybody walk around wearing his Super Bowl ring. It was really pretty cool. Next slide, please, Rick. Some of our recent patrons, folks who have used our work. Florentine Films, the Ken Burns documentary on the Vietnam War. And again, this is a great example. A lot of Vietnam veterans were not pleased with Ken Burns' Vietnam War documentary. I mean, I'll say I think it was slick and it was beautifully done, like all Ken Burns documentaries were. But everyone's going to be able to see things they don't care for, and a lot of veterans didn't care for it. But again, it's also part of the way we approach our work here. We didn't tell Ken Burns what he could have access to, or what his mindset should be, or how he should understand things. We gather this stuff, and people use it and come to their own conclusions. And this was a great example of it. Like it or not, it was still an important piece of work, and it couldn't have been done without the work that we did in helping support them. Now, obviously, we weren't the only ones who worked on the documentary. We did work on the documentary, but provided access to things for the documentary. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, Hometown Heroes Program, history. We've done things with the History Channel, Australia, the We Went to War documentary. I did a thing with C-SPAN a number of years ago with oral history interviews from that we had with veterans of the Battle of the Ia Drang in November of 1965. C-SPAN, Surgeon General, Brown University. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And this does not include the countless scholars and veterans and family members who have accessed our stuff on a daily basis since we started all of this. So folks use our stuff because it's an important collection. And that means everybody gets to have access to it. Next slide, please. Some of our other center and archive missions. Next slide. VNCA functions and operations, promote education through exhibits, classroom instruction, educational programs. We have, every year we have a conference on the history of the Vietnam War. In fact, this year we're having ours up at the new Texas Tech Dallas campus, up in the Irving area by DFW Airport. That's going to happen 11 through 13 April of this year. So if anyone is interested in attending that, if you would like to present a paper, give a talk, be on a panel, always open for that. We always encourage veterans to do so. But some of the top scholars from around the world come to this. We'll have scholars from Poland and Vietnam, Finland, Canada, all over the U.S. come to present papers and to debate the history of the Vietnam War. So if you're interested, you can find the information on our website if you want to attend. And if you can't attend, every one of our conferences over the years has been recorded and is also available freely on our website. So if you're interested in the conference we had in 2008, it was about the media and the Tet Offensive, 1968, a 3-day conference. It's available on our website free of charge, and you get access to all of it. So those are really important. We help sponsor through scholarships, sending Texas Tech students to Vietnam for a month, about a dozen of them for a month, where our director and his boss, who is a Vietnam veteran himself, go to Vietnam, travel around the country, embracing the cultural aspects, political aspects, just spending a month learning about Vietnam and its history, and not just the war's history, but that's part of it as well. Next slide, if you would, please. Here are some of our conferences in the past. There's a whole list of them there. We typically do them in Lubbock, but we're trying to reach out to more people, and with the new Texas Tech campus in Dallas, we want to take advantage of that opportunity. Again, you can see some of the list of the topics that were discussed: 1968, the Tet Offensive, 67, etc. Next slide, please. Our study abroad that I mentioned in Southeast Asia. Here are some Texas Tech students interacting with the Vietnamese. This was at a local school, doing some of the Vietnamese dances, getting involved in the local culture. Next slide, please. Visiting historical sites, this is at Dien Bien Phu. This was a lieutenant general who was a young officer during the battle of the siege of Dien Bien Phu back in 1954 that essentially drove the French out of Vietnam all those years ago. Next slide, please. Historical figures, General Pham Xuan An and Bao Ninh. Pham Xuan An was just an amazing figure. He was a really well-respected journalist in the West. He was Vietnamese, of course, but he had access to all kinds of information from Saigon, from American sources. Turns out he was a spy the entire time. And was relaying this information back to North Vietnam. Incredible, incredible story. Next slide, please. Some of the unanticipated impacts we talked about, helping the U.S. government in their search for MIAs, assistance with veterans claims, and this was a really cool one. I think this is worth sharing with y'all. We had and this was before I joined the team. We had a gentleman contact us about a veteran's claim. He said, I was a cook, but there was a rocket attack and I was injured in the mess tent or wherever. But the VA is denying my claim because, you're a cook. Cooks don't get injured in battle. You don't get a Purple Heart. You're a cook. And after about 2 hours of searching with our assistants on our website, he found the records of his unit of that time, and it said, and a cook was injured in a rocket attack. And just like that, he got his Purple Heart award after all of those years. So it's really important kind of stuff for veterans. Donations of large artifacts, you can see there. Veterans claims, Pentagon Riverine Warfare, we talked about that, lessons learned. Next slide, please, Rick. Toward the future, next slide. Here are some of the items we're going to have on permanent display once we get the new building built. We're trying to raise funds for a museum in addition to a larger archive. And these were donated to us by a local guy. Chuck Carlock was a Vietnam veteran and helicopter pilot who refurbished these and donated them to us. They're permanently on trailers now, so we can take them out to educational exhibits. For example, back in November, I took the Cobra you can see there on a trailer. I pulled that out of storage and took it to a local Lubbock elementary school, where we have every year we have a Veterans Day event where we set up artifacts and we have faculty and staff there who talk to the students as they come through about the Vietnam War, different aspects of it. And one of the things we like to do is bring out the helicopters. And I'm telling you, when the kids walk outside and they see that Cobra with the guns on it and the shark face painted on it, it's quite a scene. Also, driving it through downtown Lubbock is quite a scene. When people gawking and looking at it, you'll see those every day. But again, that's part of the work that we do. It's not just to keep this stuff inside so that it gathers dust, but get it out, make people aware of it, help explain different aspects of the Vietnam War. And getting out to the local community is as important as anything. Let the folks in West Texas know what we have going on, out there. In addition to the global scholarship aspect of it, you got to have a home too. And Lubbock is our home to this, and it's always important to work with the local groups, and it's always fun, of course, to work with kids and educators. Next slide, please, Rick. Additional large artifacts that we're trying to bring in discussions with, of course, the fast boats, PBRs, swift boats, different aircraft that will be permanently on display once we get the museum built. Next slide, please. And this is the hope for the future, the plan for the future. We received more than over a $400,000 donation dedicated for a development officer to help us raise the funds for the new museum and archive. We have some architectural renderings from Warsinger Mathis, which was the group that designed the World War II museum in New Orleans. And you can see phase one there, $25 million for the 70,000 foot facility, and then on phase two, and eventually to receive U.S. congressional designation as the National Museum of the Vietnam War. It's a long-term project, but it starts today, and any donations, of course, of materials or monetary donations is always going to be appreciated. And we can talk more about that after we end the podcast today. Next slide, please. And that is the end of it. So I've exhausted those things that I want to talk about for today's podcast, but I will be more than happy to answer any questions you or anyone may have, Rick.
Okay. So with this conference coming to the Irving location for the Texas, is that open to the public? I mean,
it is. There will be, of course, there are administrative aspects of this. You're going to have to register, and I don't know what the costs are going to be, but they're typically very, very manageable, very, very reasonable, especially given the the caliber of scholars and scholarship that presents itself with these things. And it'll be a couple days. There'll be concurrent sessions, so there'll be 2, 3, 4 different sessions going on at all times. So you got to kind of pick the ones that you want to attend. Of course, there are luncheons and there are banquets. What you want to attend there, of course, will affect what these will cost. But they are open to the public. And if you, for some reason, would like to go but can't, in about 2 weeks after the conference, they're all going to be digitized and placed on our website, so you can watch them for free.
That's good.
Anytime. And again, that goes back to our very first one. Every conference that we've had has been recorded and is available for free online.
Well, you've got so much information out there that's just available to the public.
Absolutely.
And I've got the center's website going across the bottom of the screen. So
that's a great idea.
Visit that, and then you can also get in contact with you through the website.
Absolutely.
And if you are a Vietnam veteran and like to get with Kelly to present your side or your stories, he'd be happy to talk to you. There's just so many veterans that pop into my mind that, because so many times we look at the generals or the people that had 2 or 3 silver stars or did this or that, but we don't think about the millions of people that didn't get that recognition that were out there in the bush, the guys on the ground that had guys die in their lap, and those stories are the ones that we need to hear too. It's not just the Medal of Honor recipients or 4-star generals, but it's everybody that was involved.
That is exactly right. And it's everybody's story matters. Everybody's story helps to explain what this Vietnam War meant. And that's one of the questions I ask everyone as I wrap up an interview is, what's the legacy? What does it all mean? And it's for me, I taught for over a decade at the university level, and I enjoyed it, and I loved working with students and the back and forth. But I've been doing this exclusively, the outreach and the interviewing, since 2008, and this is so much more rewarding, so much more meaningful. Any 19-year-old can hear about the bank wars of Andrew Jackson, but what I get to do now, speaking with Vietnam veterans, recording these stories, making sure that their voices are going to be heard and remembered, is incredibly rewarding in ways that teaching couldn't be. I feel that I'm making a difference. I feel that we're leaving a legacy for Vietnam veterans. And again, I'm here in the DFW area now. I moved here a few months ago, and if your veterans organization would like for me to come by and talk to the rest of the group, please let me know. I'm easy to reach and easy to schedule, so that's one of the reasons why I'm here, is to reach out to different groups, such as Roll Call. And I have attended a number of Roll Call luncheons in the past and will continue in the future. And I like to do a little work with them, with Vietnam veterans there. But that's what I'm here for. So make sure that I stay busy, folks.
We will indeed. Because in Frisco, there's a VFW unit there, and they have a really large Vietnam meeting every year. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of people show up for it. So that might be something, if you aren't already connected, we'll get you connected with them.
Let's do it.
I don't know if you've ever talked to General Carey. Have you ever...
I interviewed General Carey, and he and I have been friends for a number of years. I go to the Metroplex Marines luncheon on a regular basis, and Mike McCollum and all those guys who are behind all of that. We've got a terrific interview with General Carey.
A lot of history there, not just from Vietnam, but from Korea too. So
yeah, absolutely. And as a pilot, General Carey was, I think, the world of him.
Did you get to interview General Pittman? Did you ever interview him, Chuck Pittman?
No, I have not. We don't have that.
He passed away a couple of years ago. He was Lieutenant General, and he was a bad dude. I don't know how many times he got shot down in a helicopter, and General Carey, he just wrote that book. I've got a copy of it.
I can see my copy right there.
Yeah,
The Flying Grunt. Yeah,
there's a lot of good books coming out from these guys. My friend Mo Baker, have you got to interview him?
No, I've not.
He's a POW, 5.5 years in Hanoi Hilton, F-105 pilot, and he lives right in Burleson. We ought to go have breakfast with him some morning.
We ought to do that.
because I did a little interview with him at the Air Power Skyball. I did just a short interview, not so much about being a POW, but other things that happen. Because, what I found in my travels, because sometimes I'll take these veterans with me or take them to different functions, and our conversation's never about the war usually. It's about who they are, because like with Don Graves, he was on Iwo Jima 36 days. But, he had a life before, and certainly at 98, he's got a life after. And those are things that these guys like to talk about too, so.
And it's just as important as the rest of it.
That's right. Because
we can't know who you are unless we know who you are before, during, and after. And it all matters.
And then even with the family members, how did that war change? Because I've had several of my friends that were in the infantry in Vietnam said, they turned us into animals, and then even the Gold Star children, the Gold Star widows, they've all got a story too. So
absolutely.
So how can they get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me personally. My email address is pretty simple. It's my name separated by a dot. So it's KELLY.CRAGER, and that's at ttu.edu. So
Okay.
it's Kelly.Crager at TexasTechUniversity.education.
And
Tango uniform. Echo Delta uniform.
I'll be sure to put that on all our podcasts where we're playing, so everybody can have access to you. Kelly, it's been a pleasure to have you here, and we really appreciate you doing what you do to preserve history.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Rick. And the reality is I can't do what I do unless Vietnam veterans help me do it. So
That's right.
We're working together to make this project to help it continue.
So there's 850,000 still living, so there's a lot of stories that need to get told.
I got the energy and I got the time.
Very good. Thank you so much, Kelly, and we'll have this information up so you can get a hold of Kelly, and you can visit the Vietnam Center online and start doing your own research and see all the amazing things that they have there. So I look forward to seeing you in person again.
Absolutely.
And
a roll call probably.
I look forward to you brushing up on your dissertation, because, this is a part of Texas history, the 36th Division. So
absolutely.
I'd like to visit with you about that on a podcast in the near future.
I look forward to the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you for being part of our hometown heroes.
My pleasure. Thanks.
What a great show that was. I met Kelly just several months ago, and I was just so intrigued by what he was telling me about, not just about the 36th Division out of Brownwood in West Texas, but also about his work, because that work's so important. He was talking about the letters that were written. I need to get my dad's letters to his parents. I need to get those out and digitize them, so my sibling, my brother, and his family and my family can have those letters. And then there's letters that my wife, she was in the Army, Susan, and I was in the Army. There are letters we have that to our parents, from our parents to each other. Those things are so important. I saw Liberty Phillips with the Bridge to History and Operation Meatball. I saw her a couple of weeks ago down in Granbury, and she was telling me about just hundreds and hundreds of letters that have been written to her from World War II veterans that she's developed friendships over the years. And now many of those World War II veterans are gone, and she has all these letters. And one thing that she and I are working on is letting her come on a podcast and read those letters, that are so cherished now from these World War II veterans, because some of them just talk about their life, some of them talk about the war. But I'm looking forward to that, because history is so important. And with these interviews that Kelly does, that's a great way that the family and future generations can know who their grandfather was or their great-grandfather. The stories and the pictures and the other artifacts are so important to preserving history. So just check out the Vietnam Center at Texas Tech. It's vietnam.ttu.edu. Not a lot going on. Everything's kind of winding down for the year. We have wreaths across America at many of the local cemeteries. I know that the DFW National Cemetery is going to lay thousands and thousands of wreaths. Local cemeteries here, Pioneers Rest, they're going to be laying wreaths. Down at the cemetery at Acton, where Elizabeth Crockett's buried, they're going to have their wreaths across America. So get involved in that this weekend. Also, Larry O'Neill and Fort Worth Memories Bike Drive. They're going to be doing their bike giveaway on the 16th. It's first come, first serve. And it's going to be at Farrington Field. That's right off of University Drive in Lancaster in Fort Worth. It's not too late. There's only a few days left to donate bikes to that bike drive. There's several toy drives. I know the Marines, their deadline's going to be the 14th, I think, on collecting toys. So a lot of things like that coming up. And our next roll call meeting is not going to be until the end of January. We had one this past Friday. It was packed. It was a great luncheon. So a lot of things going on. And we just appreciate Kelly for sharing his time with us. And we appreciate you sharing your time with us on Hometown Heroes. And we will see you next week. And hopefully Mary will be back. And I think she will have graduated. She's getting another degree. I don't know how. She got more degrees than the thermometer, I think. So anyway, she'll be back with us. And we look forward to seeing you on Hometown Heroes next week.